The crimson and gold royal train pulled into the station one final time, its whistle echoing across the misty Scottish countryside like a farewell song. Inside the luxurious carriages, three generations of royalty sat together, sharing stories and laughter that would become the foundation of memories lasting a lifetime. This wasn't just any ordinary journey. It was the end of an era, the final chapter of a tradition that had connected the royal family to the people of Britain for over a century. What started as a simple idea to bring the monarchy closer to its people had transformed into something far more precious. A chance for a family, burdened by duty and protocol, to simply be human together. As the train began its slow approach to the final station, none of them knew that this journey would change not only how they saw their roles as royals, but how they understood the true meaning of family itself. The story you're about to read isn't just about crowns and ceremonies. It's about the ordinary moments that happen between extraordinary people, the conversations shared over tea while countryside villages blur past the windows, and the realization that even those born to rule are, at their core, simply a family trying to stay connected in a world that never stops watching. The morning sun cast long shadows across the platform at Edinburgh's Waverley Station as the royal train prepared for what would be its final journey. The crimson and gold carriages gleamed in the early light, each one polished to perfection by a team of dedicated staff who had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Steam rose gently from beneath the magnificent locomotive, creating an almost magical atmosphere that seemed fitting for such a historic occasion. Queen Elizabeth stood at the window of her private carriage, watching as the last of the luggage was loaded aboard. At 85 years old, she had traveled this route countless times before, but today felt different. There was a weight to this journey that she couldn't quite shake, a sense that something important was coming to an end. The royal train had been her mobile palace for decades, carrying her across the length and breadth of Britain as she fulfilled her duties as monarch. But times were changing, and even traditions as old as this one had to adapt or disappear. Prince Charles emerged from his compartment, adjusting his tie as he made his way toward his mother's carriage. The future king had been looking forward to this journey for months, not because of the official engagements that awaited them, but because of the rare opportunity it provided for uninterrupted family time. In their world of constant schedules and public appearances, moments of genuine togetherness were precious and few. Behind him came Prince William, accompanied by his wife Catherine and their three children. The younger generation of royals brought an energy to the train that seemed to lift everyone's spirits. Prince George, at 8 years old, was fascinated by everything about the locomotive, pestering the driver with questions about steam pressure and coal consumption. Princess Charlotte, 6, had claimed the window seat in the family compartment and was already making observations about the countryside they would soon be traveling through. Little Prince Louis, just 3, was more interested in the elaborate afternoon tea service that had been prepared for the journey. The decision to make this the final tour of the royal train hadn't been made lightly. For over a century, these special carriages had carried British royals across the nation, serving as a symbol of the monarchy's connection to its people. Queen Victoria had been among the first to recognize the power of rail travel for royal duties, and every monarch since had continued the tradition. But the costs of maintaining such an elaborate transport system were becoming harder to justify in modern times, especially when commercial flights could accomplish the same journeys in a fraction of the time. As the family settled into their respective compartments, there was a bittersweet quality to the atmosphere. The train's interior hadn't changed much over the decades, with its rich mahogany paneling, plush velvet seating, and crystal chandeliers that swayed gently with the motion of the carriages. Each compartment told a story of royal history, from the bedroom where King George VI had slept during his wartime travels to the dining car where countless state dinners had been held while crossing the British countryside. The route they would follow over the next 5 days had been carefully planned to showcase the diversity of the United Kingdom. Starting in Scotland, they would wind their way through the Highlands, stopping in small villages and larger towns where crowds of well-wishers would gather to catch a glimpse of their royal visitors. From there, the train would continue south through the Lake District, across the Yorkshire Dales, and, finally, into the heart of England before reaching its final destination in London. Catherine had brought along a collection of books and games to keep the children entertained during the longer stretches of travel. She understood better than most how challenging it could be for young minds to sit still for hours at a time, even in the luxurious surroundings of the royal train. But she also recognized the educational value of this journey, the chance for George, Charlotte, and Louis to see their future kingdom in a way that few people ever could. Prince Harry had originally planned to join the family for this final tour, but last-minute commitments had prevented his participation. His absence was felt keenly by everyone aboard, particularly Prince William, who had been looking forward to sharing this experience with his brother. The two had traveled on the royal train together as children, and William had hoped that this journey might provide an opportunity for them to reconnect in the wake of recent family tensions. As the train began to move, slowly at first, and then, with gathering momentum, the Queen settled back in her favorite armchair and opened the first of several briefing folders that would occupy her attention during the journey. Even on what was meant to be a family trip, the business of being monarch never stopped. There were papers to review, speeches to prepare, and decisions to make about upcoming engagements. The countryside began to roll past the windows in a slow parade of green fields, stone walls, and distant mountains. The rhythm of the rails created a soothing soundtrack that seemed to encourage contemplation and conversation. In the dining car, the royal chef was preparing what would be the first of many elaborate meals served during the journey. The menu had been carefully planned to feature local specialties from each region they would visit, from Scottish salmon and haggis to Yorkshire pudding and Cornish pasties. Prince Charles found himself drawn to the observation deck at the rear of the train, where he could watch the landscape recede into the distance. As someone who had spent decades advocating for environmental conservation and sustainable living, he appreciated the slower pace of rail travel and the reduced carbon footprint it represented compared to flying. He wondered if future generations of royals would ever have the opportunity to travel in such style and comfort. The children had quickly discovered that the train offered unique opportunities for exploration and adventure. Prince George was fascinated by the communication system that allowed different carriages to stay in contact with each other and with the locomotive crew. Princess Charlotte had appointed herself as the official photographer of the journey, using a child-friendly camera to document everything from the dining car's elaborate place settings to the views from her window seat. By mid-afternoon, the train had reached the Scottish Highlands, and the scenery outside had transformed into something that looked almost otherworldly. Towering peaks shrouded in mist rose on either side of the railway line, while ancient locks reflected the changing sky like mirrors. The Queen had seen this view many times before, but it never failed to move her. There was something about the raw beauty of Scotland that spoke to her soul, perhaps because it reminded her of the summers she had spent at Balmoral as a child. As the day progressed, the family began to settle into the unique rhythm of train travel. Unlike flying, which compressed time and distance into a few hours of discomfort, the royal train allowed for a more gradual transition from one place to another. There was time to read, time to talk, and time simply to watch the world go by. It was a luxury that few people in the modern world could afford, and everyone aboard seemed to appreciate the rare opportunity for reflection and relaxation. The evening brought the first formal dinner of the journey, served in the dining car with all the ceremony and tradition that such occasions demanded. The table was set with the finest china and crystal, while candles provided a warm glow that made the rich wood paneling seem even more lustrous. The conversation flowed easily between topics ranging from the history of the regions they were passing through to plans for future royal engagements. As night fell and the train continued its steady progress through the Scottish countryside, there was a sense that this journey represented something more than just a final tour. It was an opportunity for 3 generations of the royal family to come together in a way that their normal lives rarely allowed. Away from the pressures of public appearances and official duties. They could simply be a family sharing an extraordinary experience. The gentle, rocking motion of the train created a sense of peace and tranquility that seemed to settle over everyone aboard. In her private compartment, the Queen reflected on the many journeys she had taken on these rails, from state visits to foreign dignitaries to private family holidays. Each trip had its own memories, its own significance in the long history of her reign. Tomorrow would bring new destinations, new crowds of well-wishers, and new opportunities to connect with the people they served. But tonight, as the royal train carried them through the darkness toward whatever lay ahead, there was a sense that they were exactly where they needed to be. Dawn broke over the Cairngorms as the royal train made its first scheduled stop in the Highland village of Pitlochry. The small station platform had been transformed overnight by local volunteers who had arrived before sunrise to hang bunting, arrange flowers, and ensure that everything was perfect for the royal visit. Word had spread quickly through the community that the train would be stopping, and by 8 in the morning, hundreds of people had gathered despite the early hour and crisp mountain air. Queen Elizabeth was the first to emerge from the train, stepping onto the red carpet that had been rolled out for the occasion. She was dressed in a warm coat of Stuart tartan, a subtle nod to her Scottish heritage, and carried herself with the dignity and grace that had defined her 7 decades on the throne. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as she appeared, with many people calling out greetings and good wishes in both English and Gaelic. The local mayor, a nervous but enthusiastic woman named Margaret MacLeod, stepped forward to present the Queen with a bouquet of heather and wildflowers that had been gathered from the surrounding hills. As she made her brief, welcoming speech, her voice trembled slightly with emotion. This was the moment she had been preparing for since learning about the royal visit 6 months earlier, and she was determined to make it memorable for everyone involved. Prince Charles followed his mother onto the platform, and the warmth of his reception was immediately apparent. As the Duke of Rothesay, his Scottish title, he was particularly beloved in this part of the country. He moved easily through the crowd, stopping to chat with elderly residents who had waited hours for this opportunity, listening to stories about local history, and showing genuine interest in the community's challenges and achievements. William and Catherine appeared next with their children, and the atmosphere on the platform shifted to one of pure joy and excitement. Prince George, despite his young age, seemed to understand the significance of the moment, and walked beside his parents with a serious expression that reminded many observers of his great-grandmother. Princess Charlotte was less restrained, waving enthusiastically at the children in the crowd who had been given special permission to miss school for this once-in-a-lifetime event. Little Prince Louis provided the morning's most endearing moment when he broke away from his parents to examine a Highland pony that had been brought to the station as part of the local welcome ceremony. The 3-year-old prince showed no fear as he approached the gentle animal, reaching out to stroke its shaggy mane while photographers captured the sweet interaction. The pony's owner, an elderly farmer named Hamish McBride, beamed with pride as he explained to the young prince that Highland ponies had been used to carry supplies through these mountains for centuries. The royal family spent over an hour at the Pitlochry station, far longer than originally scheduled, but no one seemed concerned about the delay. This was exactly the kind of authentic connection that the royal train tour was meant to foster, an opportunity for the monarchy to touch the lives of ordinary people in extraordinary ways. The Queen moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting flowers, gifts, and countless expressions of loyalty and affection. One particularly moving encounter occurred when the Queen met 87-year-old Jean Robertson, who had traveled from her nursing home specifically to see the royal family. Jean had been a young woman during the Queen's coronation in 1953, and she had saved newspaper clippings and photographs from that historic day for nearly 7 decades. With tears in her eyes, she presented the Queen with a scrapbook she had created filled with memorabilia from the early years of the reign. The Queen spent several minutes examining the collection, clearly touched by the woman's dedication and the quality of her preserved memories. As the royal family prepared to reboard the train, The local school choir performed a stirring rendition of Highland Cathedral, their young voices echoing off the surrounding mountains in a moment of pure Scottish pride. The children had been practicing for weeks, and their performance was flawless despite their obvious nervousness. Princess Charlotte was particularly captivated by the music, swaying gently to the rhythm and joining in when she recognized parts of the melody. Back aboard the train, the family gathered in the observation car to wave goodbye to the crowd as they slowly pulled away from the station. Many people ran alongside the train for as far as they could, waving handkerchiefs and flags until the locomotive rounded a bend and disappeared from view. The emotional intensity of the morning had affected everyone, from the youngest family members to the Queen herself, who was seen wiping away a tear as the village faded into the distance. The next several hours of travel took them through some of Scotland's most spectacular scenery. The train climbed steadily through Glencoe, where the dramatic peaks and valleys told stories of ancient geological forces and more recent human tragedies. Prince Charles served as an informal tour guide, sharing his extensive knowledge of Scottish history and culture with his grandchildren, who were fascinated by tales of clan warfare, Highland clearances, and the romantic legends of Rob Roy and other Scottish heroes. Catherine had brought along sketch pads and colored pencils, encouraging the children to draw what they saw outside their windows. The exercise proved popular with all three young royals, though their artistic interpretations varied considerably. George's drawings were detailed and realistic, showing a natural talent for observation and precision. Charlotte's artwork was more impressionistic, filled with bold colors and emotional expression. Louis simply enjoyed making marks on the paper, creating abstract compositions that somehow captured the energy and movement of their journey. The royal chef had prepared a traditional Scottish lunch featuring locally sourced ingredients: fresh salmon from the River Tay, venison from the Highlands, and vegetables from organic farms in the Borders region. The meal was served on the train's finest china, with crystal glasses that caught and reflected the changing light from outside. The conversation during lunch ranged from serious discussions about the challenges facing rural Scottish communities to lighter topics about family traditions and shared memories. During the afternoon, the train made an unscheduled stop at a remote signal box where the driver needed to coordinate with other rail traffic. The brief pause allowed the family to step outside and experience the profound silence of the Scottish wilderness. Standing on a small platform in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains and moorland, they found themselves in a world completely removed from the usual pressures and demands of royal life. Prince William used the opportunity to teach his children about the importance of conservation and environmental protection. He pointed out how the landscape they were seeing had remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years, and he explained their family's responsibility to ensure that future generations would be able to enjoy the same natural beauty. George asked thoughtful questions about climate change and habitat preservation, showing an environmental awareness that clearly pleased his father. As the train resumed its journey toward their evening destination, the Queen retreated to her private study to review briefing materials for the next day's engagements. Despite being in her mid-80s, she maintained a work schedule that would challenge people half her age. Her dedication to duty was legendary, and even on this family-oriented trip, she refused to let important business go unattended. The late afternoon brought them to Loch Katrine, where the train followed the shoreline of the famous lake that had inspired Sir Walter Scott's epic poem, The Lady of the Lake. The autumn colors were at their peak, with the surrounding forest displaying every shade of gold, red, and amber imaginable. The reflection of the trees and the still water created a mirror image so perfect that it was sometimes difficult to tell where reality ended and reflection began. Princess Charlotte pressed her face against the window, mesmerized by the beauty of the scene. She had never seen anything quite like it, and she peppered her parents with questions about the lake, the mountains, and the history of the region. Catherine patiently answered each inquiry, sometimes consulting the guidebooks that had been provided for the journey. These moments of genuine curiosity and learning were exactly what the family had hoped to achieve through this slower, more contemplative form of travel. As evening approached, the train began its descent toward their overnight stop in the ancient city of Stirling. The approach to the city was particularly dramatic, with Stirling Castle rising majestically above the surrounding countryside like something from a fairy tale. The site of the historic fortress, where several Scottish kings have been crowned, provided a perfect ending to their first full day of travel. The train pulled into Stirling Station just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Another enthusiastic crowd had gathered to welcome the royal visitors, and the family prepared once again to step out into the public eye. But first, they took a moment to appreciate what they had already experienced together, knowing that each day of this journey would bring new adventures and new memories to treasure. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Stirling Castle as the royal train prepared to depart for the next phase of their journey. The overnight stop had provided a welcome opportunity for rest and reflection, but excitement was building for the day ahead as they traveled deeper into the heart of Scotland before crossing into England. The Queen had slept particularly well, lulled by the gentle stillness of the train and the crisp mountain air that drifted through the slightly open window of her private compartment. Prince Charles was already awake before dawn, standing in the observation car with a cup of tea as he watched the first light creep across the Scottish landscape. There was something deeply satisfying about greeting the day in this traditional way, without the usual rush of phone calls, briefings, and urgent meetings that normally demanded his immediate attention. The slower pace of train travel allowed for moments of genuine peace and contemplation that were increasingly rare in his busy life. The children were bubbling with excitement as they prepared for another day of adventure. Prince George had spent the previous evening studying maps of their route, fascinated by the railway engineering required to carry them through the challenging terrain of the Scottish borders. Princess Charlotte had filled several pages of her journal with observations about the people they had met and the places they had seen, developing what her parents recognized as a genuine interest in documenting their experiences. Their first stop of the day was the small market town of Moffat, known for its historic connections to the wool trade and its position as a gateway between Scotland and England. The local welcome was no less enthusiastic than what they had experienced in Pitlochry, but there was a different character to this community that reflected its border heritage and its history as a meeting place between two nations. The town's main street had been decorated with both Scottish and English flags, symbolizing Moffat's unique position in British history. Local historians had prepared presentations about the area's role in the ancient wool trade, the border conflicts of centuries past, and the more recent development of the region as a tourist destination. The Queen listened with genuine interest to stories about the town's famous visitors, including Robert Burns, who had written some of his most famous poems while staying at local inns. Catherine was particularly drawn to a group of local women who had revived traditional border crafts, including the intricate knitting patterns that had been passed down through generations of farming families. She spent considerable time examining their work and listening to explanations of the techniques involved. The women were clearly delighted by her genuine interest, and several pieces were presented as gifts for Princess Charlotte, who would later learn to create similar patterns under her mother's guidance. Prince William found himself in conversation with local farmers who were dealing with the challenges of modern agriculture in an ancient landscape. The discussions were serious and substantive, covering topics from climate change and its impact on traditional farming methods to the economic pressures facing rural communities throughout Britain. These conversations reinforced his growing understanding of the complex issues facing the countryside and strengthened his commitment to supporting sustainable agricultural practices. The children were entertained by a demonstration of traditional border collie sheep herding, performed by a local farmer named Donald McPherson and his remarkably intelligent dog, Meg. Prince Louis was absolutely captivated by the dog's ability to control a flock of sheep through a series of subtle whistles and commands. The demonstration took place in a field adjacent to the railway station, providing a perfect example of how traditional skills continue to thrive in modern Scotland. As the train resumed its journey south, the landscape began to change from the dramatic mountains of the Highlands to the gentler hills and valleys of the Borders region. The railway line followed ancient routes through passes that had been used for centuries by travelers moving between England and Scotland. The Queen pointed out locations where historic battles had been fought, where treaties had been signed, and where the complex relationship between the two nations had been shaped over generations. The family gathered in the dining car for lunch as the train crossed the invisible line that marked the border between Scotland and England. The moment was celebrated with a specially prepared meal that featured dishes from both countries, symbolically representing the unity of the United Kingdom. The conversation during the meal touched on themes of national identity, shared history, and the bonds that held the four nations of the United Kingdom together despite their distinct cultural differences. Prince Charles used the border crossing as an opportunity to discuss with his grandchildren the complexity of British identity and the importance of understanding and respecting the different traditions that made up their future kingdom. He explained how the royal family served as a unifying force, representing not just England but all the peoples of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth beyond. The children listened attentively, beginning to grasp the magnitude of the responsibilities they would one day inherit. The afternoon brought them through the Lake District, where the combination of mountains, lakes, and historic towns created some of the most beautiful scenery in England. The train followed a route that had been carefully planned to showcase the region's natural splendor while avoiding the most heavily traveled tourist areas. They passed through valleys where sheep grazed on impossibly green hillsides, along lakes that reflected the changing autumn sky, and past stone villages that looked virtually unchanged from centuries past. Catherine had brought along several books of poetry by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the romantic poets who had made the Lake District famous throughout the English-speaking world. She read passages aloud as the landscapes that had inspired the poems rolled past their windows, creating a perfect marriage of literature and reality. Princess Charlotte was particularly moved by Wordsworth's descriptions of nature's power to inspire and heal the human spirit. The train made an unexpected stop at a small station in the heart of the Lake District when mechanical issues required the attention of the engineering crew. Rather than remaining aboard while repairs were made, the family decided to take advantage of the delay to explore the immediate area on foot. Protected by a small security detail, they walked along a footpath that led to a scenic overlook offering panoramic views of Lake Windermere and the surrounding fells. The impromptu hike proved to be one of the most memorable experiences of the entire journey. Away from crowds and cameras, the family was able to relax and enjoy each other's company in a way that their normal lives rarely permitted. Prince George and Prince Louis collected interesting stones and leaves while Princess Charlotte continued her photographic documentation of the trip. The Queen, despite her age, proved remarkably hardy as she navigated the rough terrain with the assistance of a walking stick. During their walk, they encountered a group of hikers who had been exploring the area for several days. The casual meeting provided an opportunity for spontaneous conversation about the beauty of the region and the importance of preserving such natural treasures for future generations. The hikers were initially surprised to encounter the royal family in such an informal setting, but the conversation quickly became natural and relaxed. Prince William shared his passion for conservation and outdoor activities, discussing his work with various environmental organizations and his belief in the therapeutic benefits of spending time in nature. The hikers were impressed by his genuine knowledge and obvious commitment to environmental causes. Several of them mentioned that this chance encounter had given them a new appreciation for the royal family's dedication to protecting Britain's natural heritage. As repairs to the train were completed and the family prepared to continue their journey, there was a sense that the mechanical delay had provided an unexpected gift. The hours spent walking in the Lake District had created memories that would last far longer than any formal engagement or official ceremony. It had also demonstrated the family's ability to adapt to unexpected circumstances with grace and good humor. The late afternoon brought them through the Yorkshire Dales, where the landscape took on yet another character. The rolling hills and distinctive stone walls created a patchwork pattern that spoke of centuries of careful agriculture and land management. Small market towns and villages dotted the valleys, each with its own unique history and character. The Queen noted how this part of England represented some of the qualities she most admired about her kingdom: resilience, tradition, and a deep connection between people and the land they inhabited. As evening approached, the train began its final approach to their overnight destination in the historic city of York. The sight of York Minster rising above the ancient city walls provided a dramatic conclusion to another day of diverse experiences and meaningful encounters. The family had traveled from the Scottish Highlands to the heart of Yorkshire, covering not just geographical distance, but also experiencing the rich variety of landscapes, communities, and traditions that made up their realm. That night, as the royal train sat quietly in York Station, each member of the family had time to reflect on the experiences they had shared. The journey was proving to be everything they had hoped for and more, providing opportunities for family bonding, public engagement, and personal growth that would have been impossible through any other form of travel. Tomorrow would bring new destinations and new adventures, but the memories created over these first 2 days would remain with them forever. The morning sun illuminated the magnificent Gothic towers of York Minster as the royal train prepared for what many consider to be the most significant day of the entire tour. Today's journey would take them through the industrial heartland of England, past cities and towns where generations of British families had built their lives around manufacturing, mining, and trade. It was a region that held particular significance for the Queen, who had witnessed its transformation from the industrial powerhouse of the empire to the more diverse economy of modern Britain. The departure from York was delayed slightly to accommodate a special request from local officials. The city's ancient Guildhall had arranged for a choir of children from 12 different schools to perform a farewell concert on the station platform. The young voices, representing the multicultural community that York had become, sang a specially arranged medley of traditional English songs and more contemporary pieces that reflected the changing nature of British society. Prince Charles was visibly moved by the performance, particularly by a solo rendition of Jerusalem sung by a 10-year-old girl whose grandparents had immigrated from Bangladesh, but who sang Blake's words with the same passion as any child born in Yorkshire. The moment encapsulated everything the royal family hoped to represent: a monarchy that belonged to all British people, regardless of their background or heritage. As the train pulled away from York, the landscape gradually changed from the rural beauty of Yorkshire to the more industrial character of South Yorkshire and the Midlands. The Queen had specifically requested that their route include some of the former mining communities that had been so badly affected by the economic changes of the 1980s and 1990s. She felt it was important for the younger members of the family to understand the challenges faced by these communities and to see the remarkable resilience and pride that had helped them rebuild their lives. Their first major stop was in the town of Rotherham, where a crowd of several thousand people had gathered despite the cold October weather. Many in the crowd were elderly residents who remembered the days when the local steel works had employed most of the town's workforce. They brought with them photographs and memorabilia from the industry's heyday, eager to share their stories with the royal visitors and to ensure that their history would not be forgotten. Prince William spent considerable time talking with former steelworkers who had retrained for new careers in healthcare, education, and technology. Their stories were both heartbreaking and inspiring, demonstrating how ordinary people could adapt to extraordinary changes while maintaining their dignity and community spirit. He was particularly impressed by a group of men who had used their redundancy payments to start a social enterprise that provided training opportunities for young people in the area. Catherine was drawn to a community project that had transformed a derelict factory site into an urban farm and community center. Local women had led the initiative, creating growing spaces for fresh vegetables, workshops for learning traditional skills, and gathering places where neighbors could support each other through difficult times. The project had become a model for similar initiatives across the country, proving that communities could take control of their own regeneration when given the right support. The children were fascinated by a demonstration of traditional steelmaking techniques, performed by a group of craftsmen who had preserved the old skills even after the major industries had closed. Prince George asked detailed questions about the temperatures required for different types of metal and the tools used by blacksmiths centuries ago. The craftsmen were delighted by his genuine interest and presented him with a small horseshoe they had made that morning, explaining that it was a symbol of good luck in their community. Princess Charlotte was captivated by a display of artwork created by local school children, all inspired by the theme of our changing town. The drawings, paintings, and sculpture showed how young people saw their community's past, present, and future. Some pieces celebrated the industrial heritage, while others imagined new possibilities for their town. Charlotte spent considerable time talking with the young artists about their work, showing an empathy and interest that impressed the teachers and parents who were present. Little Prince Louis provided one of the day's most touching moments when he became separated from his parents in the crowd and was gently guided back to safety by an elderly woman named Mary Thompson. Mary had worked in the town's clothing factories for 40 years before they closed, and she had spent the morning sharing her memories with visitors to a local history display. When she saw the young prince looking lost, she naturally took his hand and began telling him stories about the town's history while they waited for his parents to find them. The reunion between Louis and his family became an opportunity for Mary to meet the other royals, and she was invited aboard the train for a brief visit. Her presence seemed to represent everything wonderful about British working-class culture: warmth, dignity, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the importance of looking after one another. The Queen spent nearly 20 minutes talking with Mary about her life and experiences, clearly touched by her stories and her obvious love for her community. As the train continued south through the Midlands, the family reflected on what they had seen and heard in Rotherham. The visit had been emotionally challenging but deeply meaningful, providing insights into the real experiences of people whose lives had been shaped by economic forces beyond their control. Prince Charles noted how important it was for the royal family to bear witness to such stories and to use their platform to ensure that these voices were heard and respected. The afternoon brought them to Birmingham, Britain's second-largest city and a place that embodied both the challenges and opportunities of modern urban Britain. The reception at New Street Station was enormous, with people representing the incredible diversity of the city's population. The crowd included recent immigrants and families whose roots in Birmingham went back generations, united in their excitement at seeing the royal family and their pride in their adopted home. The Queen was presented with a specially commissioned piece of artwork created by students from the Birmingham Institute of Art and Design. The work incorporated elements from dozens of different cultural traditions represented in the city, creating a visual celebration of multiculturalism that was both beautiful and meaningful. The young artists explained how they had worked together despite their different backgrounds and artistic traditions, finding common ground in their shared commitment to excellence and creativity. Prince William and Catherine were particularly interested in meeting representatives from the city's startup community, young entrepreneurs who were building technology companies that competed on a global stage. The contrast with the traditional industries they had seen earlier in the day was striking, but the same qualities of innovation, hard work, and community spirit were clearly present in both contexts. The children were amazed by a performance from the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra Youth Ensemble, who played pieces that range from classical European compositions to contemporary works influenced by African, Asian, and Caribbean musical traditions. The fusion of different musical cultures created something uniquely British, reflecting the country's evolution into a truly multicultural society while maintaining respect for traditional forms. During their time in Birmingham, the family also visited a community center in one of the city's most challenging neighborhoods. The center provided services ranging from job training and childcare to elderly support and youth programs. It was run entirely by volunteers from the local community, people who had identified needs in their area and had organized themselves to address them without waiting for government assistance. The visit to the community center provided some of the most genuine and moving interactions of the entire tour. Away from the formal ceremonies and prepared presentations, the royal family was able to see grassroots community work in action. They met mothers who were balancing work and education while raising families, elderly people who had found new purpose in mentoring young people, and teenagers who were learning skills that would help them build better futures. One particularly memorable encounter occurred when Prince Charles met a group of refugees who had been resettled in Birmingham and were learning English while training for new careers. Their stories of courage and determination, their gratitude for the opportunity to rebuild their lives in safety, and their commitment to contributing to their new community provided powerful reminders of Britain's role as a place of sanctuary and opportunity. As evening approached and the train prepared to leave Birmingham for their overnight stop in Oxford, the family gathered in the dining car to share their reflections on the day's experiences. The conversations were more serious and thoughtful than usual, as each family member processed what they had seen and heard. The Queen noted how much Britain had changed during her reign, but also how certain fundamental qualities had remained constant. The resilience of ordinary people, the strength of community bonds, and the capacity for innovation and adaptation. The approach to Oxford as the sun set provided a perfect contrast to the urban intensity of Birmingham. The spires and towers of the university city created a skyline that spoke of learning, tradition, and intellectual achievement stretching back nearly 1,000 years. As the train pulled into Oxford Station, there was a sense that they had traveled not just across the country, but through different aspects of the British character, each equally important and equally worthy of respect and celebration. The final morning of the royal train tour dawned gray and drizzly, with autumn mist clinging to the ancient spires of Oxford and creating an atmosphere that seemed perfectly suited to the bittersweet nature of the day ahead. Inside the royal carriages, there was a quiet sense of anticipation mixed with melancholy as the family prepared for the last leg of their journey to London and the end of an era that had spanned more than a century of royal travel. Queen Elizabeth rose earlier than usual, drawn to the window of her private compartment to watch the mist slowly lift from the Oxfordshire countryside. At 85, she had learned to treasure these moments of peace and reflection, understanding that they were becoming increasingly precious as time passed. This journey had reminded her of why she had always loved train travel, not just for its comfort and convenience, but for the way it allowed her to see her kingdom gradually unfold before her, mile by mile, village by village. The departure from Oxford was particularly poignant because it represented the beginning of the end. The station platform was crowded with university students, professors, and townspeople who had gathered to bid farewell to the royal train. Many of them understood the historical significance of this moment, the fact that they were witnessing the conclusion of a tradition that had connected the monarchy to its people for generations. Prince Charles stood with his mother on the platform, both of them visibly moved by the warmth of the send-off. A group of Oxford professors had prepared a brief presentation about the role of the royal train in British history, complete with photographs and documents that traced its evolution from Queen Victoria's first tentative journeys to the sophisticated mobile palace that had carried the family across the country over the past 4 days. The children seemed to sense the importance of the moment, even if they didn't fully understand all its implications. Prince George had become quite attached to the train crew, particularly the engine driver who had patiently answered his endless questions about steam power and railway engineering. Princess Charlotte had filled her final journal pages with drawings and observations about Oxford, while Prince Louis had made friends with the station cat, a tabby named Duchess who had apparently appointed herself as the unofficial greeter for royal visitors. As the train pulled away from Oxford for the final time, the family gathered in the observation car to watch the countryside gradually give way to the outer suburbs of London. The landscape changed from rural fields and ancient market towns to modern housing developments, industrial estates, and, finally, the dense urban sprawl that marked the approach to the capital. It was a visual representation of their journey through the many different faces of modern Britain. Catherine had organized a final family activity for the journey, asking each family member to choose their most meaningful memory from the tour and to share it with the others. The exercise proved more emotional than anyone had expected, as each person reflected on moments that had touched them in unexpected ways. The Queen chose her meeting with Mary Thompson in Rotherham, the elderly woman who had helped Prince Louis when he became separated from his parents. She explained how Mary's natural kindness and dignity represented everything she admired about the British people. Prince Charles selected his conversation with the refugees in Birmingham, particularly their stories of gratitude and determination to contribute to their new country. He spoke about how their experiences had reinforced his belief in the importance of the Commonwealth and Britain's role as a beacon of hope for people seeking new opportunities. His words carried extra weight because everyone knew he was speaking not just as a prince, but as a future king who would one day bear ultimate responsibility for the values and character of the nation. Prince William chose the impromptu hike in the Lake District, explaining how that unplanned hour of family time in natural surroundings had reminded him of what was truly important in life. He talked about the need to balance public duty with private reflection and how the slower pace of train travel had allowed for both in ways that flying never could. His perspective reflected his growing maturity as a future monarch and his understanding of the complex demands that royal life placed on family relationships. Catherine's choice was more surprising. She selected the moment in York when the children's choir had performed their farewell concert, particularly the solo performance by the young girl whose family had immigrated from Bangladesh. She explained how that moment had crystallized for her the evolution of British society and the monarchy's role in representing all the people of the realm, regardless of their background or heritage. Prince George, with the seriousness that often surprised adults, chose his interaction with the former steelworkers in Rotherham. He had been deeply impressed by their stories of adaptation and resilience, and he had begun to understand how economic changes could affect entire communities. His choice demonstrated a level of social awareness that boded well for his future role as king. Princess Charlotte selected her meeting with the community artists in Birmingham, explaining how their collaborative approach to creating something beautiful had inspired her own thinking about how people from different backgrounds could work together. Her words showed an emotional intelligence and empathy that impressed her parents and grandparents. Little Prince Louis, with the honesty of a 3-year-old, chose the Highland pony he had met at their first stop in Scotland. His simple joy in that interaction reminded everyone that sometimes the most meaningful moments were also the most basic and human. As they shared these memories, the train passed through the outer reaches of London, and the reality of their return to normal life began to assert itself. Phone calls would need to be returned, schedules would need to be confirmed, and the relentless demands of royal duty would resume. But there's also a sense that this journey had changed something fundamental in their understanding of their roles and their relationship with the people they served. The Queen used the final hour of the journey to speak more personally than she usually did about the challenges and rewards of royal service. She talked about the privilege of representing the nation, but also about the responsibility that came with that privilege. She explained how this journey had reminded her why she had dedicated her life to the service of others, and how she hoped that future generations of the royal family would continue to find ways to connect meaningfully with all the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Prince Charles listened carefully to his mother's words, understanding that they represented not just personal reflection, but also advice for his own future reign. He had already begun to think about how he might adapt royal traditions to serve the needs of a changing society while preserving the essential values that made the monarchy relevant and respected. The approach to London Paddington Station marked the end of their railway journey, but the beginning of what would prove to be a lasting impact on their family relationships and their approach to royal duty. The station platform was crowded with media, government officials, and members of the royal household, all waiting to welcome them back to the capital and to mark the end of the royal train's active service. As the train came to its final stop, there was a moment of profound silence before the usual bustle of arrival began. The Queen remained seated for a few extra seconds, looking out at the platform and perhaps thinking about all the arrivals and departures she had experienced over the decades. Then, with the dignity and grace that had defined her entire reign, she rose and prepared to step back into the public role that awaited her. The formal ceremonies that marked the end of the tour were brief, but meaningful. Railway officials presented commemorative plaques and photographs. Speeches were made about the historical significance of the royal train, and plans were announced for its preservation as a museum piece that would allow future generations to understand this important aspect of royal history. But for the family members who had shared this experience, the real significance lay not in the official ceremonies, but in the memories they had created together and the insights they had gained about their country and their role in serving it. As they prepared to leave the station and return to their separate residences and responsibilities, there was an understanding that this journey had strengthened not only their family bonds, but also their commitment to the people they served. The royal train would continue to exist as a symbol and a museum piece, but its active role in connecting the monarchy to the people had come to an end. However, the principles it represented, the values it had embodied, and the connections it had fostered would continue through the work of the family members who had experienced its final journey together. In many ways, the end of the royal train tour marked not an ending, but a beginning, a new chapter in the ongoing story of a monarchy that was learning to adapt and evolve while staying true to its essential purpose of service to others.